Hey, Dr. G, the study that I'm looking at is the effects of a peer-supported mindfulness practice on teacher stress reduction by Dana Vitolo. She looked at specifically how a stress management intervention put in for teachers impacts their stress over time, and their stress reduction, hopefully, over time is what she was looking to accomplish. So with that intervention, she took several different forms of data, and those data points were things like a stress level at the beginning of the intervention. She also had anonymously had teachers participate in a background questionnaire, learned more information about the teachers and background variables, such as what level they teach, and all of that came from the background questionnaire, how long they've been teaching, and if the teacher is currently in training. And again, all of that was anonymous. And then they did also anonymously participated in a pre-intervention stress questionnaire, a pre-intervention stress attitude scale, a mindfulness journal, and weekly meeting journal. The pre-intervention stress questionnaire and the pre-intervention stress attitude scale were also administered again at the end of the midway through, and then again at the end of the study, to try to determine if those stress levels reduced over time and if those stress levels were significantly reduced. The pre and post test questionnaire helped to answer whether the intervention had a measurable effect on teacher stress levels. That was where we see validity come in, because that teacher or this individual is trying to determine if the test that she's doing, or if the action research she's doing and the intervention she's putting in place to reduce that stress is actually helping. And so her test on that was valid, and it's based on a questionnaire done by someone named Richard from 2012, which also was used to measure teacher stress scales. So it's something that she drew upon from another resource that someone already had experience with. So that tells me that that test was probably also, or that measure was also really reliable. The attitude scale focused on teacher attitudes and how they felt before the intervention. It looked at, there's two parts, the colleague support attitude scale and the perceived stress scale. And so again, those are things that are helping her with validity. That also helps her with that triangulation of looking at multiple different facets of how things are being studied, or how the intervention is improving or not improving the teacher stress levels. And that test was, or that assessment attitude scale was also adapted from Wolgast A. Fisher, which was done in which published in 2017. So that helps with that reliability of the study as well. Going forward through this, she did not, but could have used a t-test for paired difference in order to determine statistical significance, particularly when we start to look at this overall stress score before and after the intervention. This is all done here, and she has found how the scores have varied, and each of these represent one individual in the study. She only had 7 participants, so that's why I would use a t-test versus a z-test, because it is, so I would use a t-test paired difference over the z-test because of the small population that is being looked at here. And so from that, it's hard to tell just from this table if her data was actually considered statistically significant. She goes on to show that there are statements with the greatest stress reduction. So there are one statement that she looked at, 4 different statements she looked at from up above here, from her stress questionnaire, and it seems that it went down. And we'll see that like statement 15, it was just below 3.0, but then it went down to just under 2.5. This looks statistically significant when you're just glancing at it. However, a without doing that t-test paired difference, it's hard to tell if that actually is a statistically significant shift for these statements in particular. The other area she could still do that t-test paired difference. That's my page. Oops. So then she could look at the same thing here, since we're looking at that before and after testing the t-test paired difference, as well as, again, the increase in attitude is saying that there's a significant increase, but when we look at the numbers over here, maybe there wasn't. And so it would be important to do a t-test for paired difference in order to determine that. And I said also here for a t-test pair difference in order to see that overall perceived stressed attitude to see if that improved. The other thing that I wanted to show, she attached her samples that are her actual assessments that she gave, or surveys. So this is that background questionnaire to get some information first. She definitely could have dug deeper into this information. She does not really do much of that. She looks at the frequency of the mindfulness practice, and one of the things that she does do that helps with her reliability is checking in with teachers once a week to make sure that they are still enthusiastic about participating in the study, to ensure that those people are still following through with the interventions that she's put in place. She talks about which ones that people identified being the most helpful. Back on page 26. So if we go back and look at this, she says that they identified meditation as being the most helpful, and where that comes from. And so there's quite a bit of data, and again, she didn't really look into, though, what she could have used that would have been really interesting to look at, I feel, is if she looked at the number of years teaching in the classroom and how that related compared to other overall to different to the group. So using again t-test difference of mean in order to determine if teachers that fall into each of these categories of how many years they were teaching, if they had more or less stress compared to the group overall. Another thing that she could have analyzed would have been the grade level that they teach and if that impacted it as well, and the type of school that they're teaching at over here. And so if she would have taken into all of those things, consideration to all of those things, I feel like from each of these background questionnaires, she could have really dove deep into some data using that t-test difference of mean in order to determine how those people are comparing to each other or across the group as a whole as well. However, her tests were pretty solid in terms, or questionnaires, and her scales were pretty solid in terms of the questions that they were asking. They weren't too overwhelming and too long, so it was easy to follow. Another thing she did for triangulation purposes was this daily mindfulness journal, and then as well as this weekly peer meeting. The thing that made me a little concerned, even though I feel like the triangulation was probably really helpful, the thing that there is that I'm worried about is that there is a lot of moving pieces here, and so I think it would be difficult to see um, that everyone followed with fidelity all of the time, even though it was only 7 teachers that participated. It still had a huge it could have a huge impact if they were not following through. I think particularly about one individual that was part of the study that her stress did not really reduce very much, and there was actually an instance where one of them increased. I would want to know more about if that individual was actually following through with those practices with fidelity as discussed. And it sounds like she tried to do a lot to make sure that that was being done, but it didn't necessarily always follow through. Thanks so much for your help, and I appreciate it.